Ladies and gentlemen of the media, my sincere apology for this very late start. We're having some technical difficulties, and we were also trying to bring Kathy and Kemraj out of the sitting of the National Assembly. But we're here, and we thank you for your patience. We have a few matters we're going to be addressing. We will start with Colin Haynes, our diaspora representative. He has an opening statement on mental health, after which we will come to Ms. Laura George, our advisor and lead on Indigenous Peoples Affairs, and then we will go to Ms. Kathy Hughes for a statement in relation to the Venezuela concern. So I will ask Colin to go ahead with his statement. Colin, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Thank you, Colin.
Wonderful. Members of the media, a nation suffers mentally when government lacks oversight and competence. Guyana is facing a mental health crisis of unprecedented proportions. The country has already had a dismal reputation for being among the top 5 for suicide and other mental health illnesses. The Ministry of Health response to this catastrophe is dismal. The initiative to implement the 915 suicide prevention hotline is commendable. However, beyond the fanfare of its launch, the ministry is yet to answer some key questions surrounding the details of the hotline. Experts are asking whether this hotline will have trained operators how to respond to callers in different regions and in confidentiality. If confidentiality is breached, will the violators be held accountable? Just a few months ago, the Ministry of Health was planning a mental health workshop, but there has been no more information if it's still occurring. It seems to be another PR stunt by the minister in a government that does not have the hearts and minds of the people at the forefront of health policy. The minister's daughter involvement in this event, which is the launch of the 915, creates further suspicion as she works as the public health officer for the oil company that sponsored the event. This is an indication that the nation's health is now being sold to the highest bidder. Adriana's death impact on the mental health of the nation. The death of the 11-year-old Adriana Young has thrown the country into turmoil. The country was already grappling with the events of the Madhya fire 2 years ago, increased fatality on the roads over the last 5 years, and recently the killing of 2 young men in Linden to the careless acts of the police force. Moreover, a young man has fatally killed his wife, mother-in-law, and sister-in-law, afterwards successfully carrying out a suicide attempt. The uptick in violence in school as well points to the government's failure to address systemic issues surrounding violence and mental health. These tragic events have dire consequences on the nation's mental health. Experts are expecting numerous cataclysmic events as a result of these misfortunes. We can expect an increase in domestic abuse, drug abuse, alcohol and illicit drugs, risky sexual behavior, all culminating into increased anxiety, depression, and trauma, and eventually will lead to more suicide. We at the Alliance for Change are very concerned about the trajectory of the nation's health. And so we are offering solutions as part of our action plan in healthcare and sustainable development. In response to this urgent crisis, the AFC is advocating for a comprehensive overhaul of the mental health department. Central to this vision is the establishment of a mental health institute offering sensitive and appropriate training and relevant research that includes the whole person type of mental health evaluation, diagnosis, and treatment. We will also work on the South-to-South collaboration with the University of the West Indies, which is another area that we're exploring. And to cement our commitment to mitigating mental illnesses, we propose allocating funds, which prioritizes mental health services as a standalone program. This will be Program 9, Currently, the ministry has 8 programs. We're advocating for 9 programs for mental health within the Ministry of Health. Furthermore, we will also develop a mental health workers core, which will place mental health workers in every regional hospital, community center, health posts, and also to liaise with the Ministry of Education for health workers in the schools. We recognize the need for immediately to recruit 1,000 nurses in our workforce, increase emoluments and benefit packages for current workforce, and a sustainable retention strategy within our first 100 days in office. In conclusion, we at the Alliance for Change believe that justice is rightfully served when a nation is healthy. Our nation health is its wealth. For without adequate access to healthcare services, we cannot have an educated workforce, increase economic activity through agriculture, and a sustained oil and gas economy. Thank you.
Pauline, we will now ask Laura to read her statement.
I think I sound just read without my glasses. Thank you, Beverly. Good afternoon to all our viewers there and the media houses present. My statement will be on the just concluding today, the Tushhouse Conference. So the 17th annual the 17th annual National Tushhouse Council Conference concludes today, May 23, 2025, after 5 grueling days. And I will say why I say grueling days. The conference brought together leaders of over 240 indigenous communities from Guyana. The NTC conference being held under the theme Robust Governance for Sustainable Village Development. At our last press conference, which was last week, the AFC made a recommendation for dedicated days for leaders to caucus independently meaning without ministers or any government officials being there, really to allow them to caucus independently for collective discussions and the formulation of unified recommendations. And the AFC believed that this was a very strong and good recommendation. However, this did not happen. Instead, the recommendations were met with criticism from both government and some persons in the National Tushhouse Council. And we say some persons because we are very much aware that the statements issued by the NTC were not the position of all the Tushhouse. Indigenous persons desirous of attending the conference were kept out, using various excuses, which really bordered on exclusion for various reasons. Even though the Amerindian Act provides for the NTC to allow Amerindians to attend, those who are desirous of attending. In discussions with some Tushhouse, one Tushhoe verbalized that upon reviewing the day's proceedings with other leaders, their conclusion was a feeling of being, and this is in quotation, we feel confused, abused, and used. He says the long presentations by government ministers and limited interaction by leaders, because the program is so packed, did not allow them or give them the opportunity to raise long-standing issues. Instead, it was where leaders found themselves having to ask for a fence or toilets and all of these. So the issues remain. Land rights issues remain. For example, Jawala, the leaders of Jawala will return without having their lands issues resolved, because the miners will remain as having been supported by the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, and a policy that does not respect indigenous land tenure. Chinese landing. The leaders did not participate at the conference, but they're very much aware that there was misleading statements given out by the Minister of Natural Resources on why the government is prevented or not being effective enough in assisting Chinese landing, which was misleading. The Minister of Natural Resources also gave very misleading information in terms of timeline of when the miner received their paper as opposed to when Chinese landing received their paper for the land title, disregarding completely that indigenous peoples have been there from time immemorial, especially in the area, in the regions of Chinese landing, which is in the Maruka sub-region. Chinook will return without having its land issues resolved, where their extension request seems to be an illusion, that by the time they receive the land extension, that lands would have been destroyed by heavy mining in the region, destroying their farmlands, their hunting grounds, fishing grounds, and lands that they hold sacred. And that's just a few of the unresolved issues that Tushaus will return to the communities. Yes, we know that they have received, or there were commitments out of the carbon credits funding of how much millions of dollars each community will be receiving. We are happy for that the communities will receive these, but the concerns remain that it doesn't matter how much millions indigenous peoples get or receive for their projects if the foundation of indigenous peoples' cultures and for the future generations, which remain land rights, are not respected and the land issues are not resolved, then money means nothing much if the impact of any activity that's not approved by villages remain on the increase and with government's lack of effective response. The Alliance for Change, our commitment to the Tushaus, other leaders, and all indigenous peoples, will be respecting the right to free, prior, and informed consent of indigenous peoples and respecting and supporting indigenous peoples' governance. When you return to the NTC conference next year with the Alliance for Change in Government, we will support the NTC executive to plan and design a program that fully facilitates indigenous caucus, an independent one where leaders will meet to get platforms, common issues, common recommendations. And because the AFC commits to addressing land rights beyond titling, demarcation, and extension, but fully supports and respects indigenous peoples' land tenure according to customary systems. And the discussions that will take place is to ensure that indigenous peoples are central in key national development plans of the nation, that any development plans, including hinterland infrastructure, large-scale agriculture, any other extractive activity, will be respecting the right to free, prior, and informed consent. Waterways, respecting, protecting waterways and ecosystems, and ensuring that revision of legislation, the foundation for legal framework, is really key and addressed urgently, including especially the Amerindian Act revision, the Amerindian Act 2006 will be key to be revised. And the AFC will ensure that leaders who travel to Georgetown for the conference, especially those who've had to travel the long journey from Region 9, must never have to face those challenges in the time where Guyana gets, or we say in the time of plenty, when Guyana is is receiving its share of the royalties from oil extraction, that the leaders will be treated with respect and have to face no long, arduous journey through that the elusive highway as well that we're trying to get completed forever. And we are happy to have met with some leaders. We are happy to have engaged with Tushals who have reached out to us to seek guidance, to seek clarification, to seek information, because the AFC is here and we will continue to make that representation to ensure Indigenous peoples are respected in the nation's development. Thank you.
Thank you, that was Lord George. I will now ask Dr. Grace Adams to comment. He's online. Dr. Adams has some comments that he would want to share at this time. Dr. Adams. Please.
You hear me? You hear me, Bev? Beverly, you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Dr.
Okay, good. Thanks, Beverly. I just wanted to comment on this oil spill bill again because it's very, very important because of the consequences of it. We cannot let it go. And the president must not assent to signing this bill. And the consequences are, it's dire. This could wipe out our entire economy. Just to put things into perspective, the Macondo spill costed $145 billion US dollars. Our entire national budget is $5 billion. So that's where we're heading, not to mention the other consequence for the island. This bill, again, is the biggest scam ever. And and not only it's a scam, it's undemocratic. And I want to repeat what I said in my recent letter. It's an unrelenting assault on democracy by the cabal, skin of teeth, single seat majority, emasculating the judiciary by fiat of the party's putinous authoritarianism way. Nothing was more despicably evident of this assault than the nation's chief law officer, Nandlal, contemptuously retrying the case in Parliament. And here is the evidence that there was no other motive than to get rid of Judge Kissoon's case. Here's what Mr. Nandlal said. He said, in referencing Judge Kissoon's case, unlimited guarantee is not an animal known to the legal world. Must we allow decisions to remain on record that doesn't make any sense in law? Must we be allowed to remain frustrated by an ill-informed decision by the court? This man is saying that the judiciary or Judge Kissoon is ill-informed. He said, it would be highly irresponsible to leave that decision on the public record. It is a misnomer, and this is the problem with that ruling. Then he went on further to say, this decision distorts the law of the country. And so those are clear evidence where he's going. And then on top of that, outside of that, the biggest scam is, today or this minute you hear, the bill has unlimited liability coverage, which is what was there before from the coalition, which is a blatant lie. It doesn't say that. And then a few minutes afterwards, it says, no, unlimited liability is unheard of. Here is, in his own thing, diatribe that he has on a weekly basis, he says, it doesn't limit liabilities, no cap on liabilities. Then he goes to Parliament and he says, no, listen to this nonsense. He says, no limit and no cap do not mean unlimited. Well, I don't know where he learned his English. Then he says, in his own missive here recently, he said, this does not limit liability at all, none. We said no cap on liability, none. Wherever the damage flows, liability runs with the damage. This is a minute 40.21 in his thing, and then a few minutes afterwards, he goes off. He says there is no such thing as unlimited liability. So the guy is all over the place. I don't know if he's confused or what. So then he says, listen to even more silliness. I mean, just wacky stuff. He says, we don't put a cap, but it cannot be unlimited. Now, how could you have both? We don't put a cap, but it cannot be unlimited. A simple test is for them to remove clause 40. If they're claiming that they still have unlimited liability coverage, remove clause 43 that they inserted that says it's limited, and drop the appeals case. Now, I want to go to something here that is also, it's just a disgraceful attack by Mr. Nandalal on Ms. Janki. Ms. Janki, as we all know, is our most distinguished international environmental attorney. Listen to what this man said with a blatant lie. He says that long before we, the EPA act, we put the act in place, which Ms. Janki is hailing and was passed by the PPPC in 1996. He said, this was long before we ever heard about Janki. This was long before she accumulated environmental credentials. Long before the Jankis came on the scene. Long before anyone ever heard of a person named Janki. These things were put in the act. Folks, do you want to guess who wrote the EPA Act of 1996? Ms. Janki wrote the EPA Act. So that is the kind of slanderous nonsense that this man is and we're going down a dangerous territory here. They're attacking me. They cannot handle people like Ms. Janki intellectually, so they attack her personally. And they're doing the same thing with laws. They cannot win in a court of law, so they want to, by fiat of this one-party majority, they're going to get rid of decisions that they don't like in court. And I want to say one last thing. The other thing that they keep, and we've spoken about it here in this forum many times over, about this capping stock. I don't know if it's because it rolls off of their tongue nicely that they like talk about capping stock. Now they're claiming that it was their capping stock. They put it in the permit the very first, and that's a blatant lie. That capping stock was there under the previous administration. Not only was it there, we imposed a 3-day. They have to get it on site because that's what is important. You need the capping stock at the site on the wellhead to stop the flow. So you need it there as soon as possible. We put into the permit and into the law 3 days. They went and removed it and tripled it to bring it to Guyana. There's no way you can get it when you put it in Guyana. So we were bringing it out of South Trinidad. But they brought it to Guyana to some shore base. We should, and I'm asking that the question be asked, whose shore base it's at and how much we paying that shore base to have that capping stock there, because it costs a lot of money for maintenance and to keep it ready. And the last thing, I think Mr. Nandalal decided that he was going to bluff. Well, we would like to call Mr. Nandalal's bluff. Mr. Nandalal says at exactly 1 hour of his that session that he normally had, he said these guys, referring to us, these guys would not sit down with you and debate publicly. Nandalal, I'm prepared to do that. Let us go on TV. They would never do that because I would like to do that. Well, I'm telling Mr. Nandalal that we would do it as soon as possible. As a matter of fact, I have been calling for that. So, Mr. Nandalal, we are accepting your invitation and to do it as soon as possible in public and let people see and hear the truth. Thanks.
Vincent Adams will now have a statement from Ms. Kathy Hughes, and then we will take your questions, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Beverly. Today, the Alliance for Change in a joint parliamentary action with APNU reiterated our support for Guyana's sovereignty and territorial integrity. However, we were forced to withhold support for a motion brought by the government because it lacked clear and decisive action on how Guyana will counter the threats posed by Venezuela. We note that the government's motion failed to condemn outright the elections proposed by Venezuela on May 25th, the eve of our independence celebration. The AFC expresses disappointment that several recommendations on this issue presented to the government over the last 5 years have fallen on deaf ears. We reiterate that the long-standing and increasingly volatile border controversy with the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela is not the concern of one party or one government alone. It is a national issue that calls for the full weight of Guyanese unity, resolve, and collective statesmanship. At no time in our history has the imperative for national unity been more vital. For this is not merely a contest over territory. It is a test of our maturity as a people, our fortitude as a nation, and our capacity to rise above partisanship in defense of sovereignty. Let us be absolutely clear of the AFC's position. Guyana has never and will never abandon the 1899 award. Our case is just, our position firm, and our commitment to peaceful resolution unwavering. That's why in 2018, Guyana, under the APNU AFC coalition government, took the matter to the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, the highest judicial authority under the United Nations Charter. We did so not to escalate, but to ensure finality through the rule of law. In the last few years, we have seen an alarming intensification of Venezuela's aggression. This includes decrees asserting sovereignty over Essequibo, the holding of a national referendum to annex Guyana's territory, and most dangerously, military deployments and posturing along our western frontier, and of course the proposed Venezuelan election in Essequibo. In the face of such threats, we must not waver, we must not retreat, we must stand united for our sovereignty, for our people, and for the sacred integrity of the land our ancestors toiled upon. But it is with a very heavy heart that we in the AFC say that the government has failed to act in a manner that reflects this national unity. From 2015 to 2018, during the APNU AFC administration, the Parliamentary Committee on Foreign Relations, which includes government and opposition participation, met 22 times. That is the model we set, a model of dialogue, consultation, and inclusion in matters of national interest. But in the 5 years of this PPP administration, from 2020 to date, the Foreign Relations Committee has met 3 times. 22 times under the APNU AFC, 3 times under this PPP administration. This is a clear example of the PPP's lack of commitment towards including the opposition and in creating a national approach to our border controversy. The PPP cannot call for unity when it suits itself. Unity must be built before the storm and not during it. When sovereignty is threatened, there is no PPP, APNU, or AFC. There is only Guyana. Let us therefore use this pivotal moment to craft a new compact, one in which security, diplomacy, and territorial integrity are not dictated by the party in power, but guided by a collective will of the people through their representatives. Let me now lay out a few recommendations that AFC would like to make on how we can move forward, not as a government or opposition, but as Guyanese. Number one, institutionalize bipartisan engagement. Let us establish a permanent parliamentary committee on territorial integrity, comprising representatives from all major political parties, civil society, and the diplomatic corps. This body should meet quarterly to be briefed and contribute to strategies. Number two, transparency and information sharing. We call for regular classified briefings to the opposition on all developments, legal, diplomatic, military, and political, relating to the Venezuela dispute. National security must not be a partisan secret. Number three, civic education and national mobilization. Let the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Culture launch a nationwide public education campaign to inform all Guyanese, young and old, about the legal basis of our borders, the nature of the dispute, and the importance of unity. We must build a culture of vigilance, pride, and responsibility. Number four, international unity of purpose. Our diplomats abroad must speak with one Guyanese voice. We recommend a joint parliamentary mission, inclusive of opposition and civil society, to key capitals, including Washington, Brussels, London, Beijing, and within CARICOM. We must show the world that Guyana stands united in peace and firm in sovereignty. Strategic military preparedness. While Guyana remains committed to diplomacy, we must never appear vulnerable. We support the modernization of our defense force, but call for civilian oversight and parliamentary involvement in key decisions about military cooperation and preparedness. History has taught us that when a nation is divided within, it becomes vulnerable without. Venezuela's aggression must therefore not only summon our outrage, it must also summon our unity. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, we will take your questions. I also want you to know that the former leader of the Alliance for Change, Mr. Kemal Ramstein, Member of Parliament, is here with us, and he will also be prepared to answer questions. So if you can use your raise hand feature, we will take your questions in turn. I don't see any hands raised at this point. And so, sorry, Anessa, I just saw your hand. Please go ahead with your question.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everybody. This question is for Dr. Adams.
Uh-huh.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Dr. Adams, there has been some concerns with the rate at which Exxon is pumping out our resources, and it was raised a number of times with the Vice President to know if the government is considering having a depletion policy, taking into consideration the current fluctuation of the oil prices on the global market. Can you say what is the AFC stance on a depletion policy for Guyana?
Well, the policy should be, and in some way, not that I disagree or agree with the Vice President, you always have to make a plan, and what it comes with. First of all, it starts with the field development plans, and which is what's hidden by this government. And what the field development plan does, it shows you exactly for every single project the production profile, how much oil you're gonna get over the period of time, the production rate. Based upon that tells you your income. You assume a certain price over the years, you get a certain income. You can plan your development plan of your country to determine, you know, if you want to how much money you want for that year, you know, how much production would you allow for that year to make sure you satisfy your needs for that year within your development plan. However, the bottom line is, if you put all of that aside, is that the problem is not the high production rate. Science and engineering allows for as much rate as you want, but which is built into the field development plan and the environmental impact assessment. So it's built in there. Engineering and science tells you, here is your limit. Here is what the reservoir can produce, and here is what, you know, you can practically produce in a safe manner. That is what EIA is for. The problem is we're violating those safety rules. For example, what this government is allowing is to produce 40% above the safe operating limit. That is what's not allowed. It's not the production rate. The production rate could be engineered and handled and managed in a safe manner. The science and engineering allows for that. It's available to do that. It exists. The problem is you cannot violate. When the science says that this here is the rate, the safe rate, you cannot go above 40%. That was not happening under the coalition. How come? The question needs to be asked by the media. They need to ask this administration, how come under the coalition, Exxon was abiding by all of the basic rules, safety rules. The flaring was prohibited. The dumping of water, we told them you cannot dump water. The EIA, they were producing at, for example, on Lisa 1, they were producing at 100,000 barrels per day because we said that, which was 20,000 barrels per day below the safe operating limit, so that they wouldn't even get to the safe operating limit. Do you know how much they're operating on this administration? 165,000 barrels per day. So it's not about the whether how much you produce or not. You know, you can economically decide based on your economics, but it's not the amount. It's you have to do it within the safe parameters. Engineering, if an engineering says that this is the safe parameter you're allowed and you can do that, that's it. But this government is violating all the safety laws, and on top of the safety, on top of violating it, which means when you violate it, you're increasing the risk. You're enhancing the possibility of a risk of a serious incident, such as an oil spill. But then you're against having assurance, financial insurance to cover an oil spill, which means that you would bankrupt this country if you have an oil spill, and you're enhancing the opportunity for an oil spill.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen of the press?
Yes, I have one. Oh,
Sorry, Anasa. Mr. Harris, if you could just allow Anasa to conclude her question, and then we will...
Certainly.
Thank you, sir. Anasa, go ahead, please.
Thank you. So, Dr. Adams, Vice President Barjagio is basically saying that we can't have a depletion policy because he said that the policy we currently have, it is adequate because these policies are long term, and you can't have a policy in place where if oil prices drop today, then you change a policy, and then if it rises, you change policy again. So his argument is that these long term policies should not be determined by day-to-day changes.
Well, I have never seen a policy from this administration. So what Barjagio needs to do is publish his policy. Maybe, I don't know if you've seen it, but I have never seen a policy besides just talking stuff. What is that policy? I've never seen a policy from this administration. A policy comes out of the long-term planning, which comes from the field development plans that shows you the production profile over years. And then the government looks at their strategic plan in projects that they want to do and see how it matches up, and then you can devise a policy from that if you want to not produce at the maximum level, then you can regulate how much oil you want to produce, etc. But first of all, they have not released the FDPs. And I'm glad you asked that question. This man went out and lied recently, barefacedly, and said that since they came into office, they've released every single field development plan. That's a blatant lie. I and others have been calling for them to release those FDPs. They've never released a single one. And this man got there on television before this country and said that they've released every single FDP. That's a blatant lie, and the media need to call him out on it.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. Mr. Harris, go ahead with your question, please.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I have a question for Dr. Haynes and one for Ms. George and possibly Kathy.
Go
Dr.
ahead.
Haynes, one of the things we got about mental health sometimes is the need for psychiatrists. I don't think Guyana has more than 3 psychiatrists. So what? 800,000 people, if so many. 3 psychiatrists. And I'm not aware of any program to train anymore. How do we correct this situation? And that's for you, right? For Ms. George and Kathy, you know, for the past, God knows, 4 or 5 years, I've been sitting here and I've been hearing that the government is doing this to the opposition. The government is ignoring the opposition. Everything you can think about. Why is the opposition continuing to interface with the government, knowing that the end result will be nothing?
Thank you, Adam. I will ask Colin, and it's not Dr. Haynes, Adam. He's getting there, but for now it's
Thank
Colin.
you. Yeah, thank you. So Adam, the question, the answer to the question is pretty simple. We need to get more training of psychologists. I think we are 0.5 psychologists per 100,000, which is terrible. I think the average is somewhere around 7 or 8 per every 100,000, according to the WHO. So that's why we're calling to have this mental health institute where we'll offer mental health training. We're going to hire psychologists. We're going to have to increase our number of scholarships and opportunities for people to serve. Even as we talk about this and the heels of the National Two-Shot Conference, we also want to have some more Indigenous doctors who are interested in not only general medical practice or surgery, but also mental health as well. And it's in our action plan. So we've got to encourage more scholarships. We've got to hire more psychiatrists. We've got to have more mental health workers. I mean, even without the psychiatrists or the psychologists, you need to have a second tier of people. And so that's why we believe that creating this mental health core of having mental health nurses or mental health aides or assistants, right? Those people will be able to triage mental health cases, refer them to either regional hospitals or the national hospital. But oftentimes we're seeing that even the regional or the national hospital doesn't have the capability to deal with mental health. So that's why we're believing that creating this mental health institute would serve as a place where you'll have, they can have counseling being done. We'll be able to train our own mental health professionals. And also we'll be able to do research. I mean, you're in the top 5 in the world for not only suicide, because suicide becomes the end of something, but you know, anxiety, depression, trauma, and these things, they're not often looked at. But where's the numbers? I mean, where does it say why is it that suicide is happening in Blackbush Boulder? Why is it happening in Suddy? And why is it different in the coastal area than in among the interland areas among the Indigenous population? So that's why, you know, our policy and our experts have sat down and say that, you know, this is the way that we're going to have to approach this this issue. But definitely the answer to the question is we need to recruit more psychiatrists. I mean, just having 3 psychiatrists for our whole country is atrocious.
Thank you, Colin. Laura, if you can quickly respond, why do you still engage with the government as an opposition? Why do you still?
Thank you, Adam. If I can call you Adam. why do we still continue to engage?
It's all right. I name Adam.
The opposition, the opposition parties have an obligation to their constituents because they are here with votes that we probably didn't get. Of course, we didn't get the winning seats, but we have an obligation to make sure that we continue to engage and make representation, continue pushing to hold the administration accountable, to continue to push for transparency. Of course, we know the dictatorial positions that it take, but we have a commitment to not just the constituents, but all Guyanese. So that's why we will continue to engage. When it comes to, I think maybe I just wanted to add, when it comes to the Tushaus being brought out every year to engage with government, that is also something that the Tushaus themselves, the communities at the district council meetings have raised that very question as well. When we go to the conferences, we go with the issues and they remain unresolved. And they have said, the communities are aware that it has been a talk down where, for this year, it's one that was loaded with campaign language, campaign rhetoric, some misleading and some very ugly statements in terms of, I think that Tosha mentioned, using duck and gravy and stealing from your neighbors, your neighbor fowl. And, those are irrelevant. It's an insult to Indigenous peoples and the leaders who are representing here when we have matters that are, very grave and recurring and no resolution. But why do Tushaus continue to come? I think I truly admire the leadership of Indigenous peoples, because perhaps I might have said, I am not coming this year because it's nothing. It's going to be the same thing. But perhaps our leaders have this endurance and have hope that this time is going to be different. And perhaps they must be recognized for their consistency, the persistency, and being persistent to make sure that their voices are heard and they will not give up. So that is where I would like to really respect Indigenous peoples and their leadership for not giving up, because this is our home. I continue to say that.
Adam, I'd like to chip in with an answer to that question. Yeah. Because parliamentarians and the system of parliamentary democracy, and we have a liberal democratic order under our constitution as ruled by the Caribbean Court of Justice and our Court of Appeal and all of that, requires that we live in a system whereby we must engage. That is inherently in the philosophy of liberal democratic orders, unlike the democratic centralist orders, which literally is the philosophy behind the PPP government. They live a lie when they say that they are liberal Democrats. They are all authoritarians, and I have known that, and I've pelted out to that party and put on exile because of my disagreement on that score. But you as a journalist must appreciate what are the options when you say why we do not exclude ourselves from them. Options will be violence. That's the only other option. To disengage will create some dynamic that will force us to go violent. And we, as political parties that live the democratic order, do not want that for Guyana. And I'll tell you this too. The PPP wants to provoke us into that. That is what they do all the time. And this provocation is what is going to get their support base vexed with the opposition to the extent that they will go back there into the ballot box and do the nonsense of supporting the PPP when they should not be doing it. And so I want the larger political order to be understood, what regime we are living under, It's a liberal democratic order. And notwithstanding the fact that the government of the day is pushing us off, we must not surrender or yield to their push-offs. We must be there in Parliament. We must be there in the National Two-Show conferences. We must be there on the streets. We must be there everywhere in the municipalities, the council, the city council, whatever. When in opposition, you'd still be there in the regional democratic council. And that is what we want. And I think ultimately the voters will realize that they are doing a whole load of nonsense to the extent then that they're going to vote them out. And that is the kind of order we would want. Because I do not want, as a political leader, violence to take hold of Guyana. It will become ethnicized. It will become racial. It will become brutal. And blood will be all over the place. Like what's happening in some of the other countries you see in the Middle East and all of that. We don't want that for Guyana. It seems that is what the PPP wants for Guyana.
Thank you for that, Comrade Ramjatan, Member of Parliament. Kathy?
Thank you. I think that we continue to live in hope. And of course, as both my colleagues have mentioned, we have a constitutional responsibility. We do represent close to 50% of the population. But the other thing is too that we feel that we must be the voice of reason, the voice of decency. We must be the reminder that bullyism is not the acceptable normal behavior. And we see a lot of that in the politics of the PPP. We want to remind our citizens that Guyanese believe in respect for everyone, regardless of whether you're a minister or you are just you're an employee. We have to promote decency, honesty, respect for each other. And so we try to be the voice of reason. And that's why we engage and continue to engage and will continue to engage.
If I may add to that, Mr. Harris, I understand your question and the depths of frustration in trying to deal with dictators. So, for instance, take today, a very short while back, we're in the National Assembly. A motion was brought by the government on something as sacred as our territorial integrity. On the floor, the leader of the opposition making valid points of how the motion can be strengthened, how it can be improved, pointing out the omissions, that there was no condemnation of Venezuela in that motion, especially when it came to, as Cathy pointed out, the proposed election for the 25th, pointing out that the opposition has been trying to engage the government on things like civic education, strengthening the presence and support for border communities. And what do we get as an opposition? He was being abused, verbally abused. Kathy sitting here, passed a note to him, because she's right next to him, of a point to make. She, Kathy, was abused from across the floor. So I understand the frustration of trying to deal with this dictatorship that we have as a government. But at the end of the day, as Kemrad said, we cannot give up. We cannot leave Guyana into the hands of the PPP. We will continue to fight. We will continue to strive for a more democratic society. I hope that helps, Adam.
Sorry. Yes, it does help. It does explain a lot. And the next point that I want to talk about, and this is directed because Ms. George is there. Now, the two shows are saying, look, they're forcing things at us, they aren't listening to us, dictating to us, blah, blah, blah. That we can understand. And I want to talk now about the election campaign. How much emphasis is being placed on campaigning in the indigenous communities? What program do we have to more or less educate these communities to the nature of the government and what has been happening over the years, despite the handing out of a few dollars to pacify some people?
Well, thank you again. So part of our raising awareness, we've been having engagements with community leaders. And I said earlier that community leaders have continuously reached out, seeking information, updates from the AFC and our plans going forward in times of this campaign. So we have just recently issued our booklet. It's a broad outline of and part of what we have as an action plan that we've put together for Indigenous peoples to guide our policy and development, and how Indigenous peoples are going to be included in areas that impact them, but really areas to make it a lot positive and respectful of our rights as Indigenous peoples. So we have, so we are distributing these. We have internet availability in communities. So all of those different platforms are going to be utilized. In terms of, let me see, prior to coming into the political arena, in civil society, we have made continuous recommendations to different bodies that, you know, in the run-up or even on discussions on election, that there is need for a lot of education is needed for voters. A voter education program is needed throughout the years, and not only in election time. So for this time that I am here, what I will also be very strongly pushing for is a continuous voter education, that they are informed, that Indigenous peoples are empowered to really choose the right party that respects Indigenous peoples' development. Indigenous peoples are aware, and I can tell you this, as I said, from our continuous engagement, that they are aware that the funding or the monies that are being spent and thrown out now like that is also monies that is theirs, that is ours. They're also aware that funding that comes for health, whether education and cash grants of whatever, is also monies that have passed through Parliament, scrutinized by the opposition, and also approved by the opposition. Perhaps we need to up our game in terms of PR, as I said, because that is where I think voter education has been very limited, even from the side of the PPP. And of course, there has been a reason why that has been limited, but we will be pushing for voter education and raising a lot more awareness in terms of getting information out of what our commitments are.
Thank you, Ms. Laura George. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, unfortunately, we are going to have to bring this press conference to an end, but not before I take this opportunity on behalf of the Alliance for Change to extend greetings as we celebrate the anniversary of our independence. Be reminded that the AFC is committed to Guyana's sovereignty and to the protection and preservation of our borders and our territorial integrity. We know the resolve of the Guyanese people at this time, especially as that resolve is being tested. But at the AFC, we want you to know that we stand with you. We stand with Guyana. And so we say, long live the Guyanese people. Long live the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. I thank you.